Welcome to Inside Plaistow. This is another first for PlaistowAccess Cable Channel 17. Tonight's program is on the town warrant, the budgets, and zoning and planning articles. It will give our viewers an opportunity to call in and ask questions of our panelists. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Way at the far end of the table is Selectman John Sherman, Police Chief Steve Savage, our Highway Supervisor Dan Garlington. Bob Gray is representing the Town Hall Renovation Committee, which he chaired, and Tim Moore is representing the Planning Board and will be addressing some of the conservation issues. I'd like to congratulate you for being the volunteer this year from Plaistow who was elected the New Hampshire State Volunteer of the Year. We are very proud of you and happy that you got that award.
Thank you.
Election Day is Tuesday, March 8th. And it's very easy to remember because it's March 8th and you're voting from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Copies of the warrant are available in the town clerk's office at the town hall. When you look at your ballot, when you go to Sawyer's Banquet Hall, the P next to each article refers to the fact that it's a Plaistow article and not a Timberlane School District article. With that in mind, I'd like to start, and we'll go through the budget and do the planning and the conservation articles first, and we're just going to touch on them very briefly. And if anyone at home has any questions about the articles as we get to them, the phone number to call is 382-7463. The first question on the article is to vote for all necessary town officials. I'm assuming that means we can not vote for the ones that aren't necessary, perhaps, but that remains to be seen. Articles P2 through 22 are the planning and the zoning ones, and we're going to start with those. Tim, would you respond to those for us? This is going to take pretty much the first half of the program.
Okay, thank you. As usual, there are quite a number of zoning changes, and this year most of them fall into the category of making updates to correspond to updated state RSAs. We had Conservation Law Foundation do a study reviewing our water resource articles, zoning, and so we have some updates that they made to some of the definitions. And then we have a few general ones besides. So let me talk about the ones where state RSAs have been updated, where we need to make corresponding changes to our own ordinance. And these are, let's see, all into Article P10 is the first one along those lines. If you only vote for one thing this year, please vote yes for Article P10. And that's because this is an update required by the Federal Emergency Management Association, or agency, I'm sorry. And it has to do with updating our references to flood insurance maps. It's always very precise wording that needs to be in there. It gets reviewed by FEMA, and if we don't make the update, Plaistow would stand to lose its ability to provide flood insurance for people. So, very important article. So, as I say, if you only vote for one, please vote for this one. It's very important.
Where are the flood zones designated in Plaistow, Tim?
Basically along the rivers and streams. There is quite a lot of them have very shallow banks, and so that makes a wide floodplain region. But that's in general, that's where they are. Also, a few isolated wetlands fall into that, but it's primarily the rivers and streams. The next article, P11, is another requirement from the EPA, stormwater management articles, and this is a plan we've been working on, I guess, for 2 years now. I think we have another 2 to go to fully implement all of the requirements that the EPA has placed on towns and communities to do stormwater management. And that, of course, is when we get a lot of rain, we make sure that it gets handled correctly, doesn't flood people's cellars, doesn't cause excess siltation in rivers and streams and wetlands and so forth. Articles P12 through P16 are the results of the request for making changes to some definitions, adding some prohibited uses, and this was a result of the Conservation Law Foundation study, mostly restricting uses in the Aquifer Protection District. Although the articles, there's 4 of them, and they're all reasonably lengthy, if you look through the list of restricted uses, I think they're all pretty much common sense. So those are a result of that study. Let's see.
There's no money available or involved in any of these articles, correct?
No money in any of these articles, right? There's just
Verbiage changes.
just verbiage changes. Although sometimes the impact of making a verbiage change in zoning places additional requirements on developers, which you could assume is a cost. But there's no impact to taxpayers.
Right. Okay.
The other, I guess there's two other ones that are probably worthy of mentioning. Article P9 is a rewrite of our integrated commercial residential zone, which is along 108. Previously, that zone had said any commercial 1 use is permitted or any low-density residential use is permitted. And a couple of years ago, we allowed a combined use. But what we didn't have was the ability to restrict sizes over there. And so this year we thought it's becoming more and more awkward where all the uses that you might want to permit on Route 125, which is our commercial 1 zone, you may not want to have on Route 108, which is this ICR zone. So we changed it to, in the ICR zone, list its own permitted uses and restrictions, which I think will work out much better.
ICR is integrated commercial
residential.
Residential.
Right. So two things of note there. For commercial industrial, light industrial uses, it's an 8,000 square foot footprint with the possibility of having 2 stories, where the second one would be primarily storage or maybe an office for the retail or use that would be on the first floor. No retail uses on the second floor. If you are combining a residence with a small business, the small business is limited to 2,500 square feet. And again, that's a footprint with ability to 2,500 square feet of business or retail space on the first floor and another 2,500 feet for office space pertaining to that business. It can't be multiple businesses.
Could that be a residence as well? Like an apartment for the owner?
Well,
I thought I read that in the article.
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
It could be. Okay.
But typically, I mean, the size of the residence isn't restricted, so
Okay.
you could have, you know, live in the house and have a small business in the garage or auxiliary building.
Okay.
And then the other one of note, I guess, or at least had probably as much discussion about this one as we've had any of the others, was refining the definition of vehicle dealership. And right now, that was, we had some uses in there, but it wasn't really clear. So we tried to include or exclude all different types of vehicles that we could possibly think of. And the gating criteria was if it is a vehicle that has 30 horsepower or more, it would be considered a vehicle. So if you sold those, it would be a vehicle dealership, which means you are under the restriction of 1,000 feet between vehicle dealerships. So if you sell weed whackers and small lawnmowers, we're not considering that a vehicle, although they both have small engines and, you know, gas and oil and so forth. But we would not consider that a vehicle dealership.
The thought crossed my mind when I saw two vehicles. If, say, a husband and wife had been into motorcycles for many years, those are vehicles that need to be registered and so forth. And all of a sudden they decided to give that up and do something else. And if they put those on their lawn to sell them, would that require that they be a vehicular dealership? Is that an exception,
well,
maybe?
Yeah, I think we, would apply a little common sense to that. If you're selling your own, although strictly speaking, you only can have one vehicle for sale. But I think in cases like that, it probably wouldn't be overlooked. Providing that, next month you didn't buy two more and
Right.
sell
Right.
those, so there was always
Fleet.
two for sale out there.
Right.
That would not be, that would be frowned upon. But
Okay.
so I think that's about it. Certainly if anyone has any questions about any one of those, feel free to call in and we'll try to get them answered.
I had one other question that I was curious about on the first two or three. Again, they're coming into conformance with the New Hampshire state requirements, where it changes the measurements of setbacks from the center line of the road. Does that pertain to all roads or state roads in the state regulations?
The ones that were changed, I think refer primarily to Route 125 and 108.
Okay.
We usually don't have a problem on 108. But that was a case where we had previous requirements that referenced the front lot line, and then to be consistent with how both Plaistow and Kingston would define frontage, because we tried to work together on Route 125 to have a consistent setback along 125, it was changed to 100 feet. But the intent of the 100-foot measure was from the center line of the road to the building, not the lot line.
Okay.
So this change this year, hopefully, this is the second year in a row we've tried to get this right. Hopefully this year will be the last time that we need to do that.
Does that put anybody out of conformance?
I don't think so.
Or are they grandfathered?
Well, they would be grandfathered
Okay.
anyway. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other interesting issue is the fact that we're rezoning back to where we were down at the intersection of Kingston Road and Hale Spring and
Yeah. Again, that was done in error last year. I guess the industrial zone has had kind of a long history, and initially it was kind of a strip along the railroad tracks, which would seem to make good sense. But as we more and more developed, we really don't have good access roads to a lot of the area that it's along the railroad tracks. And several years ago, we changed the area north of the tracks from industrial to residential. Why we didn't also change the area south of the tracks at the same time, I don't remember. But then last year, along Norm Major's land, he wanted to do some subdivide and build houses there. The land was really of no use for an industrial purpose. So we agreed that we would change that zoning back to residential. Unfortunately, when we prepared the map for the town meeting, it extended across Kingston Road into where present hand storage is, and it was not our intent to change that. So this is a correction.
So this is a correction.
Yes.
Right, okay. And Article P21 is the only other one that I thought was kind of interesting. It requires the removal of fire and other ruins within a specific time frame. Do you want to address that?
That has always been there. It's not new. I think what is new is what this adds is it gives the owner a year to rebuild.
Okay.
I think the requirement to clear the debris within a year was always there, but it was left kind of open-ended as to when you needed to rebuild. And so this article makes it clear that you need to not only remove all the debris, but also rebuild within a year. If you don't do that, then you would be subject to any new zoning changes or...
Okay. And the building can't exceed the size of the one that was previously there, is that the way we read it?
Well, you could if it fit in current zoning.
Okay.
So, but, if you're on particularly in the center of town, if you're on a very small lot, then the building that's there probably doesn't or cannot meet
Right.
the existing setbacks. But you are permitted to rebuild on that same footprint. If you have plenty of room and can meet setbacks, you can certainly build a larger building.
Great. Okay, any of you have any other questions that you'd like to ask of Tim while we're doing planning and conservation? Good. Thank you very, very much, Tim.
Thank you.
The next article that we're going to be talking about for our viewers' perspective is the new proposed highway garage and salt shed. And Dan Garlington, our highway supervisor, is here, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what he needs and what's wrong with where he is now.
Thank you. Yeah, the building that we're in now was put up, I believe it was put up as part of the initial landfill facility off of Oak County Road, and then converted over to a highway department, which I believe at that time in the late, I think 1976-ish time frame. They had 2 employees and I think 2 trucks, and we now have 4 employees and 4 trucks, a frontline loader and a backhoe. So obviously that tells us that the building that we're in now is too small. So we're putting a warrant out together to build a garage roughly almost 4 or 5 times the size of our current facility to house our current equipment, as well as future add-on equipment or add-on personnel to the highway department, or in a later date a hydrant system maintenance or mowing or whatever the town decides to do for their in-house facility maintenance. Also included in the warrant article is a dome style or a fully enclosed salt shed facility to house winter salt, which is very important for, as Tim had mentioned earlier, the stormwater management plan, which regulates the runoff of salt into catch basins, abutters properties, basically runoff of salt or water and salt off the land that the facility sits on.
That's been a problem for years.
It has. The salt shed we have now, I guess the word shed is an understatement, because it's more or less a lean-to or a pole barn or half a pole barn with a roof on it with cement walls as the backing. This was done 2 years ago to try to bring up to date the town's no exposure facility on the stormwater runoff. So at that time, we had, that's in the process. I'd started to look into building a new highway garage, or at that time, we were actually looking to take over the Cash Oil site, which that building is 100 by 100, and then we would utilize the building and just put up a salt shed. And
What's wrong with the building that you have now? Start the list.
yeah, it's the bottom line is it's just too small.
Yeah.
This
Safety
time of year
issues.
when we're ready, for example, for tonight, we're all, plows and sanders and wings and are all loaded and ready to go for the storm. We can't put our stuff inside. So
Right.
size, or lack of space is a definite concern and a definite problem. The second thing that has been showing up, and it's getting, I guess, a little more on the severe side, is the fact that there's a high concentration of methane gas being released from the capped landfill into the building and into the surrounding area around the building, which obviously somewhere along the line brings up a health concern. So obviously if we relocate to a site off of Main Street, that would no longer be an issue.
Right. Right now, you have to open the doors and let the whole building air out before you can go in every day.
Yeah, they're more concerned with a long period of time outside the building, which recently that hasn't happened,
Right.
because the buildup obviously gets created with time. So we go in the shop, open the garage doors, air it out, and then usually at that point we're pulling our equipment out or going to do a job, plowing snow or whatever it might be. So
Okay. Location of your proposed site is where?
the proposed location would be on what some people know as the Penn Box site, which is adjacent to the railroad tracks in front of the Chart Industrial Building. I believe it's a little over 7 acres of land, relatively flat site. just about no trees, so the clearing of trees or, disturbing of the land would be minimal, just enough to put the foundation and for the salt shed and the highway garage up. Centrally located, a little better than we are right now. We're kind of off the beaten path. We're closer to Kingston than we are anything. So that would more centrally locate the highway department within the community.
The total dollar figure for this project,
$702,000,
right?
which the Board of Selectmen and the Budget Committee have decided to put into a bond, which obviously makes a lot of sense considering it's a large amount of money. The thing that generated the cost has really gotten up there in the last 4 or 5 years, is the cost of steel.
It's going to be a steel building,
A steel building.
right?
The building will consist of, for the most part, parking areas, garage area. There'll be some work area, storage area for signs and barricades and items that we kind of trip over every day now. There'll be some office space, upstairs on the second floor, and basically, eating area, lockers and so forth.
Right.
Bathroom facilities.
A safe workplace, in other words.
Yes.
How long is this going to be spread out over the notes that we would take on it? Is it a 10-year time period, or what's the finance time frame? Do you know, John?
I think so, but
Is it 10 years?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a 10-year bond is what we're planning on. The cost in the first year of the bond payment, it would not hit the books in 2005, but the bond payment would start in 2006. And depending upon the interest rates, it's going to be a little over $100,000, $110,000. And the effect on the tax rate is noted in the warrant article.
Which I think is what, $15 per 100,000
Right,
per
right.
100,000 evaluation,
Right.
right? Anything else you want to add, Dan?
yeah, I guess the other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that this building would also allow us to expand. Recently, the biggest issue that I've had to deal with in comments, questions that I've received at my office is the cemetery. People want the cemetery plowed, they want sidewalks plowed, they want,
More
they want all of
services.
that. And we just don't have the equipment, and even if we had the equipment, we don't have a place to store the equipment. So I think we need to look beyond what we need today. We need to look what we might need tomorrow. Will this building last forever? Probably not, depending on what the town does. We've always had concerns with the hiring of outside contractors plowing snow. It's getting more and more difficult to find people to do that. So eventually, we might get into a situation where we might need to buy more of our own equipment, which again would rotate through
Keep it all
and
in-house.
keep it within the building.
Good, thank you. John?
Yeah, I think Danny did a great job explaining the issues about the highway garage. I just wanted to add a few things. There's a question and answer sheet that the selectman and town manager have prepared that's available for people to look at. It's available at the town hall. It was handed out at deliberative session, and I believe it's going to be in the town report when it comes out, and it would answer the key questions that I think people would have. A couple of things that have come up that I'd like to re-emphasize what Dan said. We think it's important that the trucks be kept inside for the hydraulics. It isn't a typical situation, if there is such a thing, but often the highway department needs to get out on the road right now. Police chief sitting next to me, and there are times when the police calls Dan and said, we have a dangerous situation on a road, and you need to get out there and take care of it now. And we don't have time for those trucks to warm up. They need to be kept inside, at least for that purpose. And Dan did mention one thing, I'm glad he did. The building will be expandable. There's no current plans to expand the building, but it'll be a metal building so that we can relatively easily add on to the end of it. We are always looking at the future. One of the things that I've heard mentioned is that there's problems with radon at the site. It's not radon that's the issue, it's methane. Radon is a naturally forming gas. Tim's more of an expert than I, but it isn't the radon is the issue, it's methane which is the issue. And it doesn't make sense to put ventilation into the existing building to take care of that because the existing building is too small and we can't expand on that site for various reasons. We're too close to the lot line. There were power lines there. So if people are wondering why we don't expand the current garage, those are the primary reasons.
Thank you. The next article is P24, and it's a petition article, so we're probably not going to have a lot of discussion on it since the petitioners are not here, but it does submit a request to increase the veterans' tax exemption from $100 to $200. And if anybody cares to talk about it, that's fine, but usually we don't address those unless it's proposed by the Board of Selectmen. John?
Just one comment. I'm sure people would be wondering what the impact to the taxpayer would be, and the impact would be approximately $35,000. There are 350 veterans that currently qualify. They right now get a $100 exemption. If it was increased to 200, it would be 350 times the $100 in addition. So the impact would be $35,000.
Okay, thank you. P25 is the elderly exemption from property tax, which is a state RSA. Would you like to explain that one?
Sure, very much. Over the last few years, one of the priorities for the Board of Selectmen has been the elderly in town. We have formed an elderly affairs committee that deals with particular issues. We certainly have expanded the programming that's available at Vic Gary for our elderly, and the elderly and the seniors in town is very important to us. This warrant article will increase the exemptions for the elderly. I won't quote the ages and the years and so forth. It's in the warrant article. Makes the warrant article a little hard to read, but there's a chart at the end in the explanation that I think summarizes it better. Our estimate is that this will give us the fourth best exemption situation in the state of New Hampshire for the elderly. We compared it to what we were able to get for information from other towns, and that put us fourth best. I know other towns are in the process of changing theirs.
Hello?
So I can't say absolutely that it's a fourth, but our analysis is that it's the fourth best in the state, and the selectmen urge you to support that warrant article.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Bye-bye. Wasn't a question, but it's a comment for our director that the sound is very, very low, and people are having difficulty hearing it, so we need to boost up the volume a little bit, quite a bit. Okay. And the next one is another exemption for the disabled individuals in town. And these exemptions are from property tax relief. Is that
That's correct.
the intention?
No, that article is similar to the one before. It's
Right.
for disabled who meet certain state criteria that are quoted in the RSAs. I believe there are two now, I don't have those notes in front of me, but two that qualify for that. And again, we're increasing the exemptions because obviously property values are going up. That's not exactly news, but property values are going up around town. And if we don't increase the exemptions for the disabled and the elderly to keep up with that, then those two categories of citizens would get impacted unfairly, we feel, by the taxes. If we don't keep the exemption levels moving up to be fairly consistent with the inflation.
And I think, if I recall, it's based on a certain income category, whether you're single or you're married, and then you get a certain percentage.
That's correct.
Based on that.
That's correct.
Okay.
I have a question, actually.
Tim?
There's a slight difference, John, I think, between the disabled veterans tax credit and the elderly and the disabled
Exemption.
exemption. Could you explain what,
Well,
if that's true, what those differences are?
sure. If you're going back 2 articles before, talking about the veterans exemption,
Yeah.
is that what you meant, Tim?
Yeah.
That is not for just disabled veterans.
Okay, I'm
That-
sorry.
That's for all
article-
veterans.
All veterans.
Well, it's not even all veterans, but there are very clear and strict and specific guidelines from the state and federal government about which veterans qualify, depending upon the years in the service, and I believe where they served. So if you were in combat as opposed to other things, you would certainly qualify. If you weren't in combat, perhaps, then you wouldn't qualify. But there's very strict guidelines that aren't set by the town. They're set by the state and federal government.
Any other comments? The next article is P27, which is the town operating budget. The proposed budget for the current year, 2005, is $6,275,393. If that budget should by any chance be defeated, the default budget from last year is $6,082,620. Not a huge difference, and the total impact on the full budget if all of the warrant articles are passed, including the budget, is about 19 cents per thousand, or a 2% increase, which is pretty commendable to our Board of Selectmen and Budget Committee for bringing a budget in at that low percentage. I think what we'd like to do is just go through the broad categories, and then if anyone has any questions from the panel or from calling in as we go along here, we can address them. Under the general government, the first section is the executive budget. Any comments on that? Election registration and vital statistics, that's pretty standard. That should go down this year since we have less elections to deal with. Conflict of Interest Committee, that's a maintenance amount of money. Cable, the only increase this year in the cable, as everybody knows, I think, is the fact that we've added a new coordinator, and he's working very hard at the studio to bring more programming to everybody, and his salary is the increase in that line item. Financial administration, tax collector, financial management, and there's quite a few under this category. Legal, any changes there that we need to talk about? Personnel?
Well, the personnel costs, not surprising. The issue there is benefits, particularly health insurance. Those costs continue to go up. And I'll speak to that again later when we talk about one of the warrant articles. But Town of Plaistow, it's obviously, this is a service organization. We are very labor intensive, and personnel costs are a very key part of our budget. And again, health insurance costs have gone up, and so that particular line item has gone up.
So other than benefits, we're not planning on adding any new positions or expanding any positions this year?
Again, there's one warrant article for police officer that we'll talk about later.
Right.
That's, I think, one of the good things about the town budget. I think there's a lot of good things, but one of them is we don't add employees, we don't add to headcount as part of our operating budget. If we're going to add a new position, then it's a separate warrant article that people get to vote on and discuss the merits of. It doesn't, quote, get buried in the operating budget. So any new head, like you mentioned, the cable coordinator last year, that was a warrant article last year. Then the following year, the costs roll into the operating budget. But there is one headcount addition that we'll talk about when we get to the warrant articles.
Thank you. Planning and zoning, Tim, anything you want to comment on?
No, I think budget-wise was pretty much a copy of last year.
Okay.
No major expenditures expected.
And a lot of your costs are recouped along the way as well?
Quite a few are recouped, right, from application fees and so forth. Yeah.
There is one, Tim, you may want to talk about briefly, which is the build-out analysis. You may want to speak to that, because that's a, selectmen feel that's a really good tool for the towns.
Yeah, we did, in the budget this year, have $5,000 to complete a build-out analysis, which means that we'll hire someone's agency to prepare a set of maps and do some analysis about how much land is left to be developed in Plaistow, both residential, commercial, and industrial. So they'll look at land that's undeveloped, look at the developable criteria. So if there's a big chunk of land that's undeveloped, but it's all wet, then obviously that would be discounted from being able to use it as a residential use, or any other use for that matter. When that's completed, what that will do for us is give us some guidelines as to how much more Plaistow can grow. in terms of population, in terms of square footage of industrial and commercial use. That in turn, we can do some analysis and see what kind of impact it might have on the fire department, the police department,
Services.
town hall services, and so forth. So a fairly important document. We'll work in conjunction with our master plan.
Yes.
And so we're looking forward to working on that and getting that completed. Thank you, John.
Okay, I
I'd,
think we're going to get to that
forgotten
one
about that.
probably last, because that's not included in the warrant, but we will get to it.
Just to continue to speak to the build-out analysis, the selectmen are very much in favor of that, because that will give us some clue as to what we need to plan for in the future. Current Board of Selectmen is very into what's the future going to be like, what do we need to plan for in terms of services and population, and we're eager to get that, and we think that's a great planning tool.
Good. The next category is government buildings, cemeteries, insurance, emergency management. I don't think there's any changes there. Highway, streets.
Actually, my budget, for the most part, was the same as last year. For the most part, the biggest increase was for salt. We had a jump in the cost of salt per ton, went up $12 in 1 year, which is substantial. So we increased that based on an average of how many tons of salt we've used in the past 3 or 4 years, and increased it by that $12. And obviously that number, snow plowing, or just about my whole budget, is dictated by Mother Nature, and it's very hard to kind of plan for in August what's going to happen for the next year or so.
She's tough on us right now,
Yeah, I don't think she likes me.
or any of us.
So, but other than the salt, my budget went up and down in certain line items, but for the most part stayed the same as last year.
Streetlights, sanitation, solid waste collection and disposal.
Yeah, to speak to that line item, the cost has not gone up very much, but I did want to mention that we've negotiated a new 5-year contract for solid waste disposal. Town manager did that, put out for competitive bids, and we're very pleased to be able to enter into a new 5-year agreement that should take effect pretty soon. I think it takes effect beginning of March or something like that.
Is that with the same company?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, and we did some shopping around and did some comparison and asked the vendors what they could do for us, and we're very pleased with the results.
Water district treatment is the next category, and we've talked about the proposed changes in the planning board. I don't know if anyone has anything to add there. I know, John, you wanted to talk about the water line a little bit.
Right. One of the things that came up toward the end of the budgeting process was the fact that the cost of extending the water line next year has gone up based upon our engineering estimates. Board of Selectmen is very interested in the water line, supporting the water line, extending the water line. The plan this coming year is to go from approximately Maple Ave on Main Street, which is near the recreation field, if you don't know where Maple Ave is, and head north up Main Street, going across Little River and ending at about where Jesse George Road is. That would be what we are going to do for this coming year. We are interested in getting the water line extended out toward 125, so that when the construction finally happens on 125, that's the best time to put the water lines in, when that work is being done, and we want to be prepared to have our water line ready to get out to 125, so that we can take advantage of that. Even with, we had to increase the budget at the last minute, that's why I mentioned it, but even with that increase, the water line account is well below what it was last year.
Is the water line ultimately going to be a benefit to residents as well as some of the commercial facilities in town in terms of insurance and safety and that sort of thing?
Yes, it already is. Last year, we worked on the water line on Kingston Road and Elm Street coming down to Main Street. We did that area to coincide with the work that was being done on the bridge across the railroad tracks on Kingston Road. So we saved money by combining it with those efforts, and also with the other work that was done on Elm Street. That's a long answer to say yes.
So we actually have hydrants there that are usable
Yep.
in case of a fire.
Right, and it does affect your local homeowner's insurance.
Insurance, right.
You should let your agent know that you are within, there's specific restrictions, I think it's something like 500 feet from a hydrant or something like that. But you will get a break on your homeowner's
Right.
insurance if you are close to the water line.
Good, thank you. Health and welfare? Nothing. Administration, pest control, health agencies, those are some of our human service groups that the town supports that help our residents. Both administrative and direct assistance. Public safety is the next big category. And under that one, we'll start off with the police department.
Well, I guess it wouldn't be much of a shock for people to know that the police department budget has increased. Fortunately or unfortunately, many of the things that we do are really tied to this thing that we call growth. Calls for service are forever increasing. We had a modest increase in the budget. I call it modest because I guess it depends on how you define modest. But we've seen some changes in the budget related to the third year of the union contract. There is a warrant article for a new contract, we'll talk about later. There are some changes from a part-time position to a full-time position as a victim witness advocate. That's going to be grant supported though, so there's a significant amount of revenue coming back. There are some fuel costs also, but there have been some changes in that. An interesting part that most people don't seem to know about is that our budget is really labor intensive. Approximately 85 to 88% of our operating budget is really personnel related and has a significant amount of fixed cost to it. So when one looks at that budget to determine where might there be an area in there to re-examine, it's pretty difficult to do that unless you're looking at the potential for layoff. But at any rate, those are some of the changes that we've made in our operating budget. And again, I would like to stress to everyone that it is calls for service driven for the most part. As John Sherman has indicated, we continuously look at the growth rate, both commercially and residentially. And we're very concerned also about where this thing is going over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years and into the future, because it's very, very important that we plan accordingly, at least from a public safety point of view, and I'm sure the fire department would feel the same way.
Right. Do you have an estimate on the percentage increase of your calls for service within the last year, say?
It's approximately 3 or 4%, and it fluctuates. Most people seem to think that most of our calls for service are commercially driven, and not really. It's residentially driven,
Right.
because that forms the basis for a public safety impact fee. And most of that is a 60-40 split,
Right.
which is kind of shocking for a lot of people.
And we toss around the term grants quite often. For anybody that's not familiar with how grants work, grants are gifts to us that we don't have to pay back. So I think we need to
Well,
make that pretty clear
Yeah, I guess that's a fair statement, Davina. Some grants carry...
until the next year.
Yeah, some grants carry conditions, 75%, 25% split, 80-20, or
Right.
100%. Most of ours traditionally have been 75-25, although there is one that appears in the warrant. There's 100%. It's a Homeland Security grant.
Good, thank you. Ambulance, fire department, nothing spectacular other than the future warrant article on that. Building inspection, cultural and recreation, no changes there. Conservation Commission, Tim, do you know of anything other than the warrant articles that might impact the budget there?
No, our budget this year went down because last year we bought a GPS locating device, which was pretty expensive for our budget anyway. So I think we're in this year at about 7,000, 5,000. I don't know, 5 to 7,000. Forgotten now exactly.
Okay.
But this year we'll purchase a laptop which will work in conjunction with the GPS device.
Okay.
So we can start to lay out trails, indicate where a lot of the drainage infrastructure is. So there's a lot of uses that will have some benefit to the town directly in terms of meeting Phase 2 stormwater development, as well as just a general sense of getting more things computerized, more things online, so we can deal with more complex issues as they come down the road.
Who's being trained to use the GPS?
We actually got a pretty good deal from the agency that we bought it from. They, for $1,000, they will come down and teach a class with, I don't want to say unlimited students, but it's done on a per student basis, where normally it would be $300 per class.
So you can have several people
So
there.
we have several people
familiar
there.
with
So we're going to invite people from all different departments if they want to
Great.
be trained on this. And
Good. Debt service is the next item on the budget. Is there anything that you want to address under that, John?
No, the interest that we pay is coming down because we are getting farther along in the library bond, which is due, the last payment there is due for the year 2009. So the town carries very little debt. Just as a side note, I've been on the town report committee for a couple of years, and so we look at town reports from other towns to get ideas, and it amazes me, just constantly amazes me how much debt other towns are carrying. It's
Right.
really surprising, I guess, and to me it would be concerning if I was in those towns. From a debt point of view, I think Plaistow's in exceptionally good shape. And all you have to do is look at town reports from other towns, and they have done a lot of borrowing that is just bound to catch up to them at some point.
When is the town report coming out?
It's going to be momentarily.
Soon.
It went to the printer, I got to get my weeks right, a week ago Friday. And the theme for the town report is conservation and preservation.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure we mentioned that. That's important to the selectmen. We need to conserve and preserve our natural resources, and that's important to us, and that'll be the theme of the town report.
Very
So
nice.
there'll be lots of articles in there related, but a number of articles in there related to that. And many of the department head reports will refer to that as well.
Good, thank you. Article P28 is asking voters to accept the highway block grant of $136,157.
It's one of those grants.
One of those
Free money.
grants, free money, right? And we use it on the roads, right?
We do, actually, that's a chunk of money we receive every year. It's formulated by population and the amount of miles of road that we maintain. Generally, we use that money for our larger projects such as paving or drainage. I think we might find ourselves using a little bit of that money this year to compensate for our snow plowing and salt budget and any other related type line items from my budget. But for the most part, it's a free chunk of money from the state that we can use
As you
for,
need it.
anything related to the highways and
Right.
streets.
Great, thank you. P29 is to accept the Federal Homeland Security Grant. I guess this is under your domain, Chief Savage?
It is. As Dan indicated, it's another one of those free money, situations,
We
although
like those.
I really wonder about, free money. But in this particular case, it's a 100% grant. And the amount, I believe, is $81,400 some odd dollars. What we're trying to do is enhance the communication system of the police department. Now, we're still experiencing, even though we've made some significant changes, we're still experiencing problems with our portable radios in the remote areas, as are our sister communities as well. So we wrote the grant with hopes of putting in repeater systems in at least 2 locations, one in Kingston, one in Newton. And what that will do, we hope, would be a dramatic improvement on portable radios, so that when we're out in remote areas of the area of the town and our sister towns on mutual aid calls, it will allow us to communicate with our base stations. Many times we've been out on K9 tracks with no communication between the dog handler and the communication center, and we just think that's particularly egregious. So it's an opportunity for the feds to help us, step up to the plate and help us with the communication situation. And our technical people advise us that they believe that this is the way to really resolve these problems. So it's an opportunity for us.
Think it would be an improvement if they were brother communities instead of sister communities?
It would be an improvement whether it's a brother or a sister.
P30, a vote to raise and appropriate $250,000 to add to the expendable trust fund for the town hall improvements. It's your turn, Bob.
Yeah, I can talk.
You can talk at last, yes.
Yeah, well, as you know, for the last couple of years, we've been setting aside money or putting money into this fund, the Town Hall Renovation Fund, about $120,000 each of the last 2 years. And this year we're asking for $250,000 in order to get the first phase of the project off. As you may recall, the articles last year and the year before spelt out that this was going to be a multi-year project and a multi-phase project. And we want to get the first phase underway. First phase of the project includes sprinkling of the building. And that surprises a lot of people even today that I talk to, that they don't realize that there's no sprinkling system in our town hall. The roof of the town hall is made of slate, and the fire chief who sits on the committee with me has informed us that, you know, if there's a fire in that building, it's going to go up like a match. And basically he said that at that point he's going to order all of his men out and the building will burn to the ground. And to replicate that building, the committee estimates that it would be in the order of $2.3 to $2.4 million. And it's much cheaper, obviously, to sprinkle the building than it is to do that. Also, part of Phase 1 includes electrical upgrades, bringing the building up to code. I don't know if you've had a chance to view the film that's currently running on Channel 17, but Barry Sargent, who's on the committee, and Bernadine Fitzgerald, as well as the town manager, they take you on pretty much a tour of the town hall, and if you have a chance to view that, you should probably take a look at that. And you can see what the wiring situation is in the basement. It's not up to...
Pretty scary.
It is pretty scary. It's not up to code. There are wires that are literally punctured through the brick of the building, and they're just... The wires go all in different directions. There's not enough plugs, adequate plugs, in the building for office space. And in general, we have the bathrooms sit right over where the electrical junctions come into the building, and that's something that we'd like to take care of as well. The estimated cost of those electrical upgrades is $50,000. Of course, that will come out of the money that we're asking for as part of Phase 1. The other major cost involved in that is the elevator. In order to get maximum use out of the space that we currently have, it was determined that the best course of action for the town would be to install an elevator. This will be a 4-stop elevator. It will go to the basement, to the main floor where most everybody enters the building, to the second floor, which is the Great Hall area, and then it will also stop on a 4th level, which is the balcony level. That level, not in Phase 1, but in Phase 2, we plan on renovating into additional office space. So the elevator is a major cost. The cost of that is $150,000 approximately. But when you look at the long-term use of Town Hall, I think that that factors into having that elevator. And also just to have use of that second floor, we've been told by the state that in order to use that space upstairs for a public meeting room, which is what we intend to use it for, that we have to have an elevator. A lot of people have suggested a chair lift, and the state has informed us that that would not be adequate, and we would still not be able to use that space upstairs if we had that.
Okay.
So that in general is phase one. There is going to be another phase, and we intend on asking for additional money in the future. Phase two consists of heating and cooling upgrades, office reconfiguration, and additional parking, because with the added space, we're hoping to be able to use the Great Hall for more than just meetings. Maybe some groups or multiple meetings can happen at the same time, which of course requires additional parking. And there is a plan for that doubles the current spacing around Town Hall now. So we approximately have about 24 spaces now. We're looking at maybe 50 spaces by the time we're done.
Great. And the total cost of the first phase, I believe we have, what, 200,000 in the fund now, and we're looking to add another 250,000 to it, so that it would be a total of 450. Is that correct information?
Correct. It would be about $460,000 in the fund. Some of that money has already been spent on our architect, and but there is approximately, I would say, $230,000 still in the fund if this gets
passed.
right. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. There's probably $230,000 in the fund now. If this gets passed, there'll probably be $460,000.
So we're looking to add 250,000 to what is there to use for phase one.
Correct.
Right.
And the reason for the additional money, more money this year than what we've asked for in the past, is because our architect has informed us that the cost of doing these renovations, especially the first phase renovations, the sprinkling and the elevator, has approximately gone up about $80,000 or $90,000 since last year. And so by putting only $121,000 aside, it would take us several more years to get to a point where we could actually start doing work.
Good. At this point, I'd like to take a brief break because we're coming up on the 1 hour mark and we need to switch tapes. So I think we'll take about a 2-minute hiatus and everyone can have a quick breather, and then we'll be back with the rest of the warrant articles. Thank you.
Make sure that people understand the $250,000 that we're talking about would come out of the town's fund balance. The town is in very good shape financially, and we are not asking that this $250,000 will be raised by taxes, but instead will come out of our fund balance. Some people call it a savings account, but anyway, it's money that we already have in the bank. And I'm sure people would have additional questions. Again, we did a question and answer sheet for this that's available at the town hall and will also be in the town report. And one point that came up at kind of the last minute that needs a little emphasis is the issue of the chairlift. The information that we have gotten from the state is that a chairlift is not legally acceptable. It will not meet the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, because as we've gotten from the state official, is that if you can install an elevator, that is the only acceptable solution. And a chairlift will not allow us to make the entire building ADA compatible.
Okay. Is it a safe assumption that perhaps next year when you come back for phase two, that there will be a impact on the tax base?
That's possible. I think it depends upon how quickly we think we need to implement phase two. One of the reasons that we split it into two phases is exactly what Bob mentioned, is we've got some things we need to do now, and we need to protect that building. We need to get that building sprinkled. And so we put that into a phase one. We decided we did not want to wait until we had everything figured out about what we were going to do with the town hall, that we would split it into two phases, put the critical stuff in phase one, which is the sprinkling of the building, making the building ADA accessible, and straightening out the electrical problems. We don't know yet how the rest of the the work will be funded, because we haven't discussed it, and we don't know what the real urgency would be to get that stuff done.
I understand from listening to some of the budget committee meetings, which I do once in a while, there is a total dollar figure that's estimated for the entire project. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, Bob, if you would make.
Yeah, the total cost of the project is estimated at $750,000, $750,000. There was at one point a little less than that, but some people had mentioned that there was not enough money as a contingency set aside. So recently that figure was upgraded about $45,000. And what we estimated the total cost of the project to be. Again, I'd emphasize that to reconstruct what we currently have, you're looking at $2.3, $2.4 million. The goal of our committee is not to, put gold faucets in town hall and just do these elaborate makeovers, but to make the building more public friendly, make it more serviceable, and make it usable for the next 25 years. And for the most part, the town hall has not had major work done to it for the life of the building. Sure, we've upgraded windows and we've added ramps and we've insulated and we've moved load-bearing walls left and right to make office space, but we're talking about some significant changes to the town hall, like I said, that sort of make it usable for the next 25 years.
I think there's a lot of interest in maintaining and preserving the natural history of the center of town, including the town hall, which is probably the most important building. But I guarantee there's somebody sitting out there saying, instead of replicating the town hall, what would it cost us to build a more modern building at another site?
Well, that I've heard also. I've heard it on this channel, as a matter of fact. I have always said that to replicate just a building, let's say a steel structure, while that may be less expensive than to recreate a town hall, as I put it to the town manager the last time we talked about this, is how would you feel about conducting your town business in a cubicle? Because that's what it would come down to. No windows, just a door, steel structure, and just people sitting around in a cold building. And I think people, as long as I've been involved with the town, going on 11 years now, people have wanted to keep town government in its building and wants to keep the center of town hall the center of the town. That really, we looked into that option very early in the stage of just building a new building, and we ruled that out rather quickly.
Okay, I just want to make clear that that has been considered because...
It has been talked about,
Yep.
right.
John?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that's not a cost-effective choice if you look at the numbers. One of the things I wanted to mention is that now we're talking a little bit about Phase 2. One of the things that would come out of Phase 2 would be additional office space. We're thinking probably we'll get 5 additional offices out of it. And, for example, using the balcony on what would be considered the 3rd floor will allow us to have 2 offices up there. So while office space isn't a near-term critical need at Town Hall, eventually we will probably need more office space, and this plan will probably give us 5 additional offices. Wanted to mention that. That would be part of Phase 2, though.
And what would those offices be used for?
We don't know yet. There isn't any plan, but that was one of the key requirements from the Board of Selectmen. When the committee was formed, there was a lengthy list of things that we gave them to please make sure they considered. That information's all available on the webpage, by the way, but that was one of the things that was a key requirement from the Board of Selectmen. Please don't come back with a plan that doesn't allow for more office space to be created. It's not a near-term need, but who knows what will happen in the future, and we need to be thinking about the future.
Right. You mentioned the webpage. That website is www.plaistow.com,
Yep.
correct?
A lot of great stuff on there.
Yep.
I recommend people go there. There's super things on there.
Any other comments on the town hall renovation? I just had one quick thought. If the article by some chance doesn't pass, is there any provision for still doing the code violation issues on the town hall just to make it safe?
We haven't discussed that, although that could be a real possibility. but that hasn't been discussed yet. So I mean, our focus is, we want to get people to vote
Support
yes,
this.
support the
Right,
warrant
right.
article, and if it does not pass, again, you're liable to see more money in future articles in future years.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it passes or doesn't pass, you're going to be seeing additional money.
It's always more expensive if you move it out a few years.
Correct.
Okay, I think we've exhausted that pretty much. Article P31, a vote to raise and appropriate $20,000 to replenish the expendable trust fund for payment of police and fire outside details. And these are ones that exceed the budgeted amount for that year. How does that work, Steve?
It's a relatively new concept starting this current fiscal year. Both police and fire departments budget a certain amount of money for outside details, and outside details meaning those details during the day or evening that are paid for by independent contractors, i.e. The school district, the utilities, construction projects, and so forth. The difficulty has been for us to forecast what that amount of money might be from year to year. Essentially, we've budgeted $90,000 for outside details. And it's fluctuated up or down over the years, and in many years we've understated or underestimated what it would be, and it would show that we've spent more, when in fact on the revenue side we're bringing in significantly more than we've budgeted. Mm-hmm. So what we've tried to do, and other towns in the state are doing it, they've created that trust whereby you not only have the $90,000, but you have another pool of money. In this particular case, it was established this fiscal year in the amount of $30,000, and we got into that $30,000 approximately $20,000 worth. So we did exceed the $90,000, and in the new year, we're budgeting for what we've spent, which is $20,000. So that continuously remains there as an option for us, not only police but fire as well. It's a great way of doing it because. Doing the budgeting, because what it does is it allows you, whether you have budgeted $90,000 or if you budget $60,000 or you budget $140,000, whatever that happens to be, you have that cushion of a $30,000 amount of money in case you do go over. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, we did this past year.
And then you recoup that and it goes back into that same
Exactly.
fund rather than the general
Exactly.
fund. Okay. P32 is to vote to raise and appropriate $8,888 to be added to the expendable trust fund for internet use. These are funds that come from Comcast cable. It represents probably, I think, 0.5% of what we get, and that's used for the town internet services, the web page, and any other internet-related services. Anyone have anything to add to that? Article P33 is to raise $85,000 for engineering repair and replacement of the Garden Road Bridge, which is red listed in need of critical repair, which it was way back when I was a selectman. Things haven't changed somehow. Garden Road Bridge is down behind where the old Dairy Queen used to be. And that is 80% reimbursement. Is that from the state?
That's
so
correct.
We don't have to pay the full boat on that one either.
That's correct. It's been in the capital improvement plan for a few years. We've been deferring it, but we felt this was the year that we needed to get that bridge replaced for various reasons. As you said, it's Garden Road. Not everybody knows where Garden Road is, but it's parallel to 125 behind Bank North. It comes out on 125, kind of across from Staples. And there's a bridge there, and it needs to be repaired. Most of the money comes from the state, but we need to put some upfront money in order to get the bridge repaired. It doesn't have anything to do with the water line, but with the increased development on 125, there's probably more traffic that goes across there, and we need to get that bridge repaired.
Mm-hmm. The next article, P34, is a fire department one, and since there's just one article from the fire department, Chief McCardle told me that John Sherman could duly represent him in addressing any questions.
I'm going to be speaking to this. This is a good warrant article. We asked people to support it. We put $80,000, we hope to put $80,000 every year into a capital reserve fund for fire equipment purposes. The way we got to that number was in the capital improvement plan committee meeting. We projected out the next 20 years what we would need for fire department equipment. That number came to $1,600,000. And we divided that by 20, and we said we ought to be putting $80,000 a year in the capital reserve fund. And just FYI, for years we had not been doing that. For many years we were only putting $25,000 away, and that was going to catch up to us eventually. Don Petzold, when he was chief, said, I don't know what the right number is, but I know 25 isn't enough, and so we increased it to 50. But once we did some analysis, we feel that 80,000 is the right number. There is no immediate plan to buy a piece of fire department apparatus. I think the next one is out a few years in 2007. But again, the money doesn't get spent for that apparatus unless it goes to the townspeople. This is just making sure that we're in front of the curve and we have enough money for when we need it.
In speaking with John, he mentioned the fact that the rescue vehicle number 6 would be the next one that they're looking at. I think in 2006 is what he said, and they have a committee working on speccing that out and so forth, so it's a little ways out yet. Okay, Chief Savage, P35. It sounds like we're playing bingo. We're asking voters to vote for $33,732 for the 2005 costs associated with a new 5-year collective bargaining agreement for the police department. And that includes police officers as well as dispatchers. And I know everyone's worked very hard on getting this agreement between the town of Plaistow and the Teamsters Union. It's an increase of, I think, 3.6% per year with a 10% cap on health insurance, if I recall. And I'll turn it over and you can expound on it a little bit more.
I can make some general comments, Davina. I probably will let John speak to it
Okay,
also.
either one.
If you recall, in years past, I've stepped away from
Right.
negotiations. So other than being a resource, the town managers handle it. And I would like to offer my kudos not only to the union but to the town manager for achieving a 5-year contract. It is a rarity in New Hampshire for collective bargaining agreements to be much beyond 3 years. So 5 years is great in the sense that it brings a huge amount of stability to the department. And I think everyone is sufficiently well versed in labor relations to know that when you're dealing with contracts continuously, the kinds of things that you constantly read about that can be very unsettling. So a 5-year contract is a good thing for the town. It's a good thing for the community, a good thing for the police department as well. There are a number of percentage increases. A lot of areas are affected. It's the cost of living. There are step increases for certain affected personnel. It does affect approximately 22 full and part-time people, officers as well as dispatchers. Doesn't affect me, other than having to manage it. But it has some other components to it also. Some educational stipends, longevity. And probably the biggest thing for us has been the capping of at 10% of the healthcare costs, which is sort of unheard of in the other public sector employees. And I guess from that point, I'd turn it over to John for comment.
Before we go to John, I do have a poster up here showing what the intended increases are each year over the life of the contract. And I don't know if the camera can zoom in on that in a second or not, but you're welcome to go ahead and talk about it, John.
Sure. Very much agree with Steve. We're just excited that we have a 5-year contract on the table. Congratulations to the town manager and to the members of the union negotiating committee. We think a 5-year plan offers stability for the town, allows us to plan, and allows the union membership to know what the future brings. We think that we need to invest in our employees, whether it's policemen or policewomen or any of our employees. It does mention in the intent that it's a 3.6% yearly increase. That's really an average yearly increase. The actual increase is 5% in the first year, 2005. then 3%, then 3%, then 3.5, and 3.5. The way we looked at it is in the first year of the contract, we felt we needed to make a 2% adjustment to kind of get things up to where they should be. And then really the increases are 3, 3, 3, 3.5, and 3.5, which averages out to 3.6. That's where that number comes from. And again, excuse me, the biggest benefit to the town is what both you and Steve mentioned. This puts a cap on health insurance costs for the police union, maximum of 10% a year over the next 5 years. And it says in the intent of the warrant article, as you see, that in a 5-year period, I think from 1999 to 2004, those costs went up a total of like 288%. So being able to cap health insurance costs at 10%, we think is a big benefit to the town. We're excited that the police union agrees with that, and we urge people to support this contract. In addition, of course, there are many minor, what I would call minor contract changes, language changes, and other less significant increases, but those are the two major points.
And if the contract is approved at town vote of the townspeople, it's effective from April 1st of this year through March 31st of 2010.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. New entry-level full-time police officer is on the warrant.
It is again. A number of years ago, we did a personnel acquisition study, and we looked at calls for service. We looked at the growth rate, commercial as well as residential, and we looked at factors that govern their industry standards that govern the number of full-time police officers to 1,000 population. And some of the things that we were looking at the time, Davina, was our fluid population, not only our fixed population, our school population, because we are a regional school district, and the commercial strip, and the growth that was occurring over that time frame, and it's currently in the planning chute. And when we looked at that and we presented a PowerPoint to the Board of Selectmen and Budget Committee, we determined that we were approximately 4 full-time employees, police officers, behind what the norm should be. In that particular year, we came forward with a warrant article for 2. It left 2 to be achieved. This past year, we asked for an additional full-time officer, and we failed at town meeting by approximately 70 votes. So we're still at that stage that we need 2 full-timers. We're asking for 1 this year, and we're looking at an out year to achieve that balance. And I would ask people to support that warrant article. I know it's a tough nut to crack. It's an additional police officer. But I would ask people to be very mindful of the things that they're seeing on 125. It is not going to get any better. It probably would get worse. And worse is defined as increased calls for service, the kinds of cases and things of that sort that we're handling. The day-to-day calls for service are increasing. And I think there's probably what I would refer to as a modest increase in residential growth. But the big thing that's going to drive us is the commercial. And as long as our calls for service are increasing and that commercial growth rate is what it is, I think the voters should expect to see those kind of requests on a yearly basis.
And the amount of this is around $24,000.
What we've tried to
this
do
year.
is, yes, we've tried to stagger the implementation. I think it was as of September 1st of '05 for the implementation. And there are some one-time roll-up costs for equipment in there that, again, it's a one-time cost. But that doesn't truly represent the entire fiscal year package. The real cost will be in '06 for the full year and the benefits.
Would that number be reduced at all if we got someone that had already been through the academy? Would that save any significant amount of money?
There may be a savings of approximately $2,000. Our experience has been that that isn't always necessarily
A good thing.
a good thing, because oftentimes when you're hiring somebody full-time certified, they bring with it a significant price. And I guess we've sort of felt that some of our current employees that are working for us in either part-time endeavors or in communications deserve a shot at a full-time police officer position to which they aspire.
Right.
And it gives us an opportunity to train them. We know what we're getting. And we see that as a real benefit to the community.
And what would the full-time salary be next year for this person? 33, around there? 35?
I'd say probably around 35, 38.
35. Okay. Good, thank you. Any other comments? John?
Just again, this does not complete the plan from either the chief of police point of view or the selectman's point of view. This is the potential third addition out of the 4 that were requested. We had talked about going for the 4th one even this year, and we had talked about what kind of role that person would be. We had talked about perhaps that the 4th person ought to be a school resource officer at the middle school, which we think is a need and the chief thinks is a need. He had preliminary talks with the school board, and they weren't, or superintendent, and they weren't in a position to support that. But maybe that's something that'll be coming up in the future. And I guess I'd like Steve to just speak to. Steve, this officer would be a split shift, or can you talk about what shift he or she would be working?
Yes. In the police field, most frequently you work certain inflexible shifts, 4 to midnight to 8, 8 to 4. In this particular case, we're going to offer a split shift. It might be 5 to 2 a.m. so that it gives us greater coverage in those time frames. Because in doing a calls for service analysis, that's where we seem to get the most calls. So as we add people, we're going to look at being creative in how we establish those shifts for our people. There are certain inflexible shifts, but we think we can do more with personnel by adding, those split shifts. And that's what we're going to do with this one. And depending on what the future brings us, whether it's a school resource officer or just a patrol officer, we probably would bolster those particular split shifts with
Do
more
we have a
people.
resource officer in the high school?
We do. Matter of fact, this is the year that the school district will assume the full cost of that, which means that we will be billing them, as you will, if you
Will
will.
we still pay for it?
But we still pay for it, exactly. And there has been a significant amount of pressure to do the same thing in the middle school, but timing is everything, and this is not the time for it.
Right. Thank you. We're going to stay down that end of the table. I think, John, you can address the next one. We're asking for $1,773 to provide a raise for the town clerk. The balance covers Medicare and Social Security, which is $212, and the increase would be $1,561. This is a elected individual, and that's why it's appearing on the warrant.
Right, there are 3 warrant articles.
Right, do
this
you
one
want to
and the
do
next
them all
2.
together? Or?
Well, it's hard to talk about one without the other.
Right.
One for the town clerk, one for the tax collector, and one for the treasurer.
Right.
Asking for increases that are consistent with the increases that were given to town employees. And that's what the request is. There are some RSAs that cover what you can do for elected officials that makes it different than what you can do for town employees. And so, as it currently stands, whenever an increase is coming up for either the town clerk, tax collector, or treasurer, it is handled as a separate warrant article. We think that those 3 increases are appropriate for those 3 positions. It does make it a little difficult to administer those salaries, or excuse me, that compensation for those 3 positions because of the RSAs and because of different types of positions. When we talk about how we administer salaries for town employees or a police officer, for example, we compare to what police officers in other towns make, because potentially a police officer here would go and would be able to get a police officer job in another town. But when you talk about tax collector, treasurer, and town clerk, it's not like they're going to go to another town and take those positions. But we do look at what other towns pay in order to do a comparison and just to see what makes sense. Mm-hmm. But it's different trying to administer the compensation for those 3 positions.
Right.
And we urge people to support those increases. We think they're appropriate. It doesn't necessarily bring those 3 positions to where they should be, but the Board of Selectmen supports all 3 of those increases.
For the treasurer, it would be an appropriation of $345, and for the tax collector, an appropriation of $1,229, just so that people have a number that we're talking about. The next one is an article to appropriate the sum of $2,000 to be added to the Conservation Fund. We'll come back down here to you, Tim.
Yeah, I think it's
5,000, hopefully.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But anyway, the reason for that is to add a small amount to the Conservation Fund, which we use to either purchase land or obtain conservation easements. The most notable of which, just this week, or last week, I guess, we had the signing of the easement to protect the Cox Farm.
Oh, okay.
So that will remain as some type of agricultural or farm use, and not be subdivided and see, a dozen new homes over there.
Spring up over there, huh?
So we were, a lot of people worked really hard on that, the Board of Selectmen and the town manager, as well as the Conservation Commission. But that did deplete the Conservation Fund.
So it's down to nothing.
Well, there's still, I think, 40, 50,000, something in there. When it wouldn't be, not quite that much, but it's not depleted totally, but, to purchase a couple acres of land is well over 100,000 typically, so this is just a small contribution that we try to make every year to keep that fund increasing.
So that will be used as conservation land, or does the town have any specific plans for it?
We don't have any specific plans in terms of, parcel A, certain tax lot number, tax map or lot number. But what we are looking at is all the area that's now part of the town forest and conservation lands around Frog Pond Woods. There's still some parcels there that are the town, we think the town owns, but we don't have clear title to, so we're trying to do some research to make sure we get those straightened out. There's still some privately held land over there that we haven't, approached anyone about purchasing. But that is one general area where we're always keeping our ears and eyes open for opportunities that come up. And the other major areas are somewhat across the street, around what's Mount Misery, or that whole tract of land in there. That's another big area that's undeveloped. So we're always looking in that area for opportunities as well.
Good. Article P41 is a appropriation for $2,000 for the Greater Salem Regional Transportation Council. They provide transportation for the elderly to doctor's appointments and that sort of thing. And they're also talking about an expanded van service. And this appropriation may be increased in the future years with other towns contributing. John, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This is part of a proposal that was presented to all of the regional selectmen by a planner from the Rockingham Planning Commission. This is to set up an initiative whereby transportation gets coordinated for multiple towns using perhaps one central agency. They are asking for $2,000 this year to get the program going. We're excited about it, and we think that it's a good thing to do, and we think it will work. We did put some language in the warrant article in the intent to explain to people that while it's $2,000 this year, it may be more next year, and we also did reserve the right to not fund it if enough of the other towns didn't come into this cooperative kind of situation. We think it's great. We think transportation for the elderly is a big problem. This is a possible solution. We hope it works out. And we're in support of it, and we hope the other towns around are in support of it, because that's what it will take. It'll take a group of towns getting together to get this up and going.
What are the towns that are also involved?
Gee, I have it in my notes, but it's 11 towns,
Oh, okay,
mostly
that
in
many.
this area. Might even be 13 or something
Okay.
like that, but most of the usual local towns here, and extending up into Derry, for example, and this going more westerly from here than
Okay.
easterly. There is already a similar situation for the seacoast area, and this would be a similar kind of thing. Well, there are a few concerns about the details of how it'll work out. It was a great presentation, makes a lot of sense, but the devil's in the details, and we'll see if they're able to accomplish it. Basically, the idea would be they would bid it out to one agency who would coordinate the transportation. Their thinking is that there's enough transportation out there, but it needs to be coordinated so that you're not making single-person trips from Plaistow to Derry, 2 or 3 times a day. But if you could centralize that and have it coordinated, there'd be some savings.
So it would be different runs rather than individual, like taxi service?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Article P42 refers back to the collective bargaining agreement for the police department. And if the previous article, which we've already talked about, P35, is defeated, this article authorizes the governing body, which is the Board of Selectmen, to call one special town meeting to address the cost items involved with the contract. And if you want to add anything else to that, feel free.
Just support it just in case. If we didn't have this, then there would be additional costs to arrange a special town meeting, and you'd need to do some a specific petition for that purpose. So this is a contingency. So vote in favor of it just in case.
Right. The next one is kind of interesting. It's a housekeeping article, but it asks voters to discontinue a road that was 3 rods wide through a section of what is now Pollard Park. Not sure exactly where, but it ran from Main Street to the intersection of Elm Street and Park Avenue. It's a recommendation from a title searcher, and I've never heard of a title searcher making a recommendation. But anyway, tell us about it, John.
Please vote in favor of it. It's really just a housekeeping issue. There is no hidden meaning here. As part of the research into the town hall land and what we could do for parking at town hall, we had a title researcher go in and look, and the property at town hall is more complicated than you thought. It's more than one parcel originally, and what he found is that it appears that there might be a right-of-way connecting Elm Street to Main Street, basically going through where the monuments are now.
Nice.
So it's only a possibility. The selectmen ask you to vote for it because we just didn't want there to be a situation of somebody having an accident or driving off of Elm Street and hitting something on the town hall property, a monument or whatever, and somebody finding that there was this obscure old right-of-way to, and to cloud the issue. Just please vote in favor of it, and so we make sure that that's off the books, and that's why we put it on just in case.
And we have no clue who might have that right-of-way, right?
Right.
They may be long gone by now.
Right, and it was really unclear in the paperwork, but again, it was because there were multiple parcels of land that form what is now the town hall property.
Right.
And apparently there was a right-of-way or a road that went through there.
Great. Any other comments on the 3 Rod Road? I think that's pretty much going to wind up what we have to talk about. Article 44 is a petition article. I will read it, but again, we don't usually address petition articles from a town's point of view. Petitioners are not here. The article reads, "The tax collector, town clerk, and treasurer seek the same percentage salary increase as other non-union town employees. That request will go into the operating budget, but if the request is greater, it will go as a separate article, as it is this year, beginning in 2006. Are there any comments on that? Okay. Article P45 is another petition article. It authorizes the selectmen to sell town-owned property located at 17 Canterbury Forest for price, terms, and condition, which the selectmen deem to be in the best interest of the town. It's not generating revenue, and if it's sold, somebody seems to think it might generate revenue, and we'd like to know if it's house, land, wetlands, or whatever.
This came before the Board of Selectmen already. Someone came to the board offering to buy this piece of land. This piece of land is on Canterbury Forest. I think the address is 17 Canterbury Forest. If you're familiar at all with it, there's a turn there, and this is a small piece of land on that turn. It is wetland. It can't be developed in and of itself, but the person who wanted to buy the land owns a 50 plus acres out behind that. And that land connects out to Harriman Road. So the assumption would be that this person wants to buy the land from the town in order to offer access to this 50-plus acres piece of land off of Harriman. Board of Selectmen took the approach that it is not our policy, and we don't want to be in the business of selling off town land that will promote residential development. And we feel that that's what this would do.
How did the town get this land originally?
I honestly don't know.
Do you know, Tim?
Yeah,
When the Canterbury Forest subdivision went in many years ago at this point, there was, I think, 2 or 3 lots that were not built. And sometime in the early 90s, I think, they came back with a proposal, or someone came back with a proposal to build on those 2 or 3 lots. I forget now which
At the end
the
there.
case. Yeah,
Yep.
I think they were all adjacent to one another. The other lots were fine, but this one lot, as John mentioned, was too wet to build on. So however they subdivided, they ended up with one less lot that they could build on. So I'm not sure if the property, probably just, we got it through a tax lien,
Okay.
would be my guess. But it was kind of a leftover piece from the original Canterbury Forest subdivision.
My dogs used to swim down there. Yes, John?
As you read the warrant article as originally presented, it sounds appealing that, of course, why not sell the land and why not get the tax revenue from it rather than have it just sit there doing nothing. But once you look into the situation at all and you realize the implication of selling that land, it would be quite obvious that the intent would be that there would be some residential development there. And the Board of Selectmen feels that they should not be in the business of selling off town land to promote residential development. And just one final point, the wording of the warrant article was changed at the deliberative session after lengthy debate about what the wording should be. People were talking about that there should be a very high price put on the land, $1 million or something, and it finally ended up being amended in a different way to let people know that when you go to town meeting to vote, that almost unanimously at the deliberative session they were in favor of this land not being sold. And by the way, this had already come before the Board of Selectmen. We had already said we don't want to sell it. It's not in the best interest of the town. And I don't think that's going to change.
And that's why it's a petition article.
And that's why it's a petitioned warrant article.
Right. Great. Anyone have any other closing comments before we go to our final question, which was a call-in question, John?
Yeah, I wanted to mention it earlier, but now that you're asking, one of the concerns that I know people have in looking at the warrant is the sequence of the warrant articles that are on the warrant. It's caused some agitation, and I don't blame you, frankly. The zoning articles are now before the money warrant articles. The quote money warrant articles don't start until we get to P30. The reason they're in that sequence is because that's the legal advice that we received. It appears that really state law is that the zoning articles need to appear immediately after the information about the election of officers, and then the money warrant articles are to go last. So we took the advice of town council, and after great concern, we decided to change the sequence of the warrant articles. We felt that that's what we need to do. I'm sure it'll cause some confusion for a while. I would suggest that people not go to vote at town meeting unless they have looked over the warrant articles first, made some notes in their town report about what they want to support or not support. My advice would be don't go there cold, because you will be surprised at a minimum. But anyway, that's why we changed the sequence of the warrant articles. We did it reluctantly, but that was the legal advice that we received. And we didn't want to run into a situation where some warrant article that was passed, there was some dispute because of the sequence of the warrant articles.
Good, thank you. I've heard comments previously too, and one of the reasons that we decided to do this format as a call-in with a panel discussion is that there's not always a lot of information about planning and zoning articles, and people need to prepare themselves ahead of time to find out the facts behind the request. The caller that called in earlier, I explained that this is not on the warrant, but it has been bantied about in conversation, and I don't think a plan has come before the planning board yet, but there is some talk about a transfer station in the center of town at the old chart site, and I'm wondering if anybody would like to comment on that just briefly.
Can do that. As you said, the company that is proposing this came to the planning board for a discussion. They showed us a series of PowerPoint slides that explained who they were, what the business was, what types of trash they would be recycling. They had proposed, or thinking of proposing, initially a small startup size and then expanding to something a little larger. Everything would be self-contained in the chart building, and any of the truck access would be from 125, which has caused some other problems with crossing wetlands. But it's really too, until we get a site plan and actual application before the planning board, it's really too premature to speculate on what might or might not be. Obviously, the planning board will take a great deal of caution in reviewing that, especially along the lines of traffic impact and health and safety concerns with the environment.
Good, thank you very much. Anyone else want to comment? John?
Well, it isn't a Board of Selectmen issue, but we did discuss it because we looked at their presentation that they did for the planning board, and in addition to mentioning what would strictly be planning board issues, they talked about other issues, other benefits to the town, talking about how many employees would be employed there. For example, they were using the number 20. So they were using that as a benefit, and the Board of Selectmen felt, yeah, but you're not comparing that to the number of employees that used to be employed there, which is like 10 times as many. Also, we looked at concerns about the traffic and how that would work, and they also used a justification of that this would put the property back on the tax rolls and that you'd be getting full tax money for the value of the property, and that's a misstatement because we already are getting the full value of that property, that the value of that property has not gone down because the previous owners moved out.
Still exists, and they're still paying
We're still
taxes,
getting the same
right.
amount of tax money that we were getting before. So while we do have concerns about the overall proposal, but we did feel that we should speak to those issues that were outside just the planning board purview and seemed to be Board of Selectmen issues. So we sent a letter to the planning board expressing our input on those specific issues.
Well, thank you very much. I personally want to thank all of you for making this program happen and for giving up a whole evening of your time. The program has gone live, so anyone who is watching it at a later time will not be afforded the opportunity to call in and ask questions. This is your last chance. I really appreciate everyone being here. I encourage voters to go to the polls on March 8th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Voting is at Sawyer's Banquet Hall on Route 125. You'll receive 2 ballots. One is for the town warrant and the other is for the Timberlane Regional School District. Read each one, evaluate them carefully, and the money that you are spending will depend upon the services you get and what your tax bill will be. So in the meantime, until you tune in again, we thank you and think spring.